We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a special edition Sox Machine Live, an emergency as we have some breaking news. Earlier this morning, Chicago White Sox manager Pedro Grifol was fired by White Sox general manager Chris Getz. And thank you for everyone joining us. I'm Josh Nelson alongside Sox Machine's beat reporter James Fegan and managing editor Jim Margulis as we are streaming live on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. And this was a decision in the making for a bit. Last week on Wednesday, it was reported from Bob Nightingale of USA Today that Jerry Reinsdorf had met with both Pedro Grifol and Chris Getz prior to the White Sox going on their latest road trip to Minneapolis and Oakland. And after having the losing streak tie the Baltimore Orioles for longest in American League history at 21 games and losing yesterday afternoon 3-2, Chris Getz evidently was given permission to make the change, dismiss Pedro Grifol with the day off. And now the White Sox will have interim manager Grady Sizemore take over, not Charlie Montoyo, for this upcoming series against the Chicago Cubs and New York Yankees, as that's the homestand. James, you were on the press conference Zoom with Chris Getz. What did you learn from Getz about why he made this decision now and what he is hoping for with the coaching changes for the rest of the season?
He confirmed that he would prefer, as an organization, they do not set an all-time record for losses. That's he did not say that. That wasn't the overriding reason. I asked him directly about that. The reasons he cited were I don't know if you find it refreshing in 2024 for a manager to say, like, our projection system said that we would be a lot better and we underperformed them. But yeah, he did mention later, like, talking to Grifol over, his tenure or when they've overlapped, like that there's a disconnect between them, that they had different philosophies on things. That could be a euphemism for a lot of like disagreements they've had. But it mostly centered around like the team is wildly underperformed, that, they know, I think the quote I shared was like, we know this roster is flawed, but that's at the same time, we expected to win more games. I think I had someone quote tweet me. So like, that's the professional equivalent of like, our expectations are already low, but holy hell. So I think he didn't like get too deep into like, why is our defense so bad when that's all we cared about in the offseason? Or he did mention offensively being really disappointed, but he's termed it as more of a this is something we've been bad at for years thing. And I think if you were looking for the hint of we need on offense of Brian Bannister, he gave it to you, saying like we might need to bring someone from outside the organization to really look into like why our hitting has struggled over the course of the years. But certainly Pedro has the manager of this team and also a former hitting coach and also someone who spoke about, what their approach needed to be for a lot, bore the brunt of a lot of that. So at the same time, the hitting coach, usually the first canary in the coal mine is going to remain in Marcus Thames, and the assistants for Purge are all either people, Charlie Montoyo, hired by the previous front office, or Mike Tozar and Eddie Rodriguez, people who kind of were really close with Grifol with the Royals organization as he came over. So kind of seemingly purging a lot of that, initial unit that was viewed as, potentially difference making when they was hired less than 2 years ago, if you can imagine, seemed to be a priority. And Grady Sizemore is interim seemingly only. If you wanted to believe that Chris Getz is going to hire Skip Shoemaker, he definitely centered around that in the criteria he laid out, where he wants someone currently in uniform in another organization. It could be different uniforms. He also acknowledged it didn't necessarily have to be someone with managerial experience, that they'd be open-minded. But at the same time, he even said that they're open-minded when he was asked directly if he'd offer someone a 5-year contract, if they thought that stability would bring them over. When we see that, that would be interesting. But I think if you were, it's interesting because like we hear him talk in person only so much, and a lot of it gets filled in with details from seemingly people who are reporting with more ownership sources, and that kind of momentum of maybe AJ Przinsky will manage, is kind of, or maybe they'll bring back Ozzie. It was directly contradicted by kind of what gets laid out as his parameters. But we've covered a managerial search before where the GM has laid out the parameters and then someone who didn't fit it comes in. So it was interesting to see him stake out exactly what he wanted as clearly as he did. Maybe not, as exactly as I would have hoped. I'm sure it breaks a lot of league rules, but if you just said like, if I can pry Shoemaker away from the Marlins, that'd be dandy. I think that I'd enjoy that quarter. But it at least sends us like a really clear benchmark of what it's supposed to turn out to be, and then we can measure it against what it does turn out to be.
Yeah, this is what Chris Getz had to say in the press release. Quote, as we all recognize, our team's performance this season has been disappointing on many levels, despite the on-field struggles and lack of success. We appreciate the effort and professionalism Pedro and the staff brought to the ballpark every day. These 2 seasons have been very challenging. Unfortunately, the results were not there, and a change is necessary as we look to our future and the development of new energy around the team. And for those 2 seasons, Pedro Grifol sets the worst winning percentage ever in White Sox history as a manager, with a .319 win-loss percentage with 89 wins and 190 losses. That was something that was pointed out in the press release, and that was a bit surprising, Jim, that they pointed out what Grifol's win-loss record was as White Sox manager the last couple of years. But Jim, we just recorded a podcast yesterday, which for those that didn't get a chance to listen, you mentioned about this upcoming series against the Chicago Cubs that it's not the elephant in the room. It's, hey, everyone, the elephant is still in the room. Why is the elephant still in the room? And this morning, the elephant is no longer in the room anymore, and the White Sox are going in another direction. What are your thoughts about the White Sox now and Chris Getz specifically making this decision?
It felt like the only sensible time, especially since they ended the losing streak, but also lost a game right after they ended the losing streak. Like, it's perfect timing in terms of a new manager not taking over something historically or actively historically awful. Like, it might get there by the end of September, but for the timing, there's a little bit of a grace period. There's also a loss to where it's not like cutting Martin Maldonado right in the middle of like a heater and having like nobody in the minors who's like as good as Martin Maldonado currently is. So, there was one win to clear the deck, and then one loss to remind everybody, oh yeah, this is how it's been going the whole time. There is no upswing here. So go ahead and here's a day off right before Cubs series. He can kind of change the tenor a little bit of how the team's being covered, even if they do lose 2 to their crosstown rivals, and the news cycle can't get worse. So there is a way to cushion the blow of current losing. I think also it makes sense to go to Sizemore versus Montoyo. I think for both of them, one is Sizemore just got here, no coaching experience. So if something happens where he makes a positive impact, cool. If it's more of the same, I don't think Sizemore will be judged for it. I think he's still new enough to where, he's being thrown into this. If he wants to be a manager elsewhere, a coach elsewhere, I don't think it should sully his prospects. I think if it's a case where he never wants to be on a major league staff again after the carnage he's witnessed up close, also so much the better. Whereas Montoyo seems like, he still, probably wants to, have jobs here and there a little bit. Maybe, he had a reputation in Toronto, and I think he solidified it with just how low of a profile he kept in Chicago to where he's not really a front man and doesn't maybe want to be somebody who tasked with talking every day to a media about a team that's such a garbage fire. So I think Sizemore's fresh enough to where he's different. And also he can't be expected to do a good job. Whereas Montoyo, he has 4 years of experience or 3.5 years of experience to where he should have a little bit of know-how for how to turn something around. If it doesn't turn around, I think it reflects kind of poorly on him. Also thought it was refreshing, I think, to fire Tozar and Rodriguez, especially Tozar. He rubbed me the wrong way when he came in, and as far as I'm going to be a baseball handyman, gonna dabble here, gonna dabble there. If infield drills need fixing, I'll do that. If hitting needs hitting or hitting preparation needs fixing, I'll step in and do that. Our preparation is going to be elite. That was a quote that James got. Our in-game preparation is going to be elite, and or pre-game preparation, I should say, and it was not. And then he gets kind of demoted to the most invisible job on a coaching staff, which is assistant hitting coach. And now he's out. So I think it's good to clear them out and basically be coaching staff like a ragtag group that can't possibly expect to be turned around. And if they happen to have a winning September somehow against all odds, then I think it reflects well on everybody. But if they do set the record for historical ineptitude, I don't think it'll fall on Sizemore or Jerschley or anybody else who's currently stepping up.
Yeah, again, as Jim and James both mentioned, Grady Sizemore now takes over as the interim manager for the Chicago White Sox. No, he's never done this job before. So he'll be learning in the remaining 40-some games the White Sox have. I'm hoping I'm saying his last name right. Is it Sisson? Doug Sisson? Sisson. Doug Sisson is the bench coach, and Sisson's been coaching for a while. He, shockingly, it'd be hard to believe, he was once a coach on the Kansas City Royals in the early 2010s. He was also the University of Auburn's hitting coach prior to taking a job within the Chicago White Sox organization starting in the 2017 season. So Doug has had some coaching experience both in the majors and in the college level. Justin Jerschley, White Sox fans know about Jerschley. He's had multiple promotions within the White Sox minor league system. Recently, the AAA Charlotte manager, and now he'll be coaching third base for the Chicago White Sox with Montoyo, Rodriguez, and Tosar no longer part of the organization. Any insight, James? Was that just because they're allies of Grifol? I wonder, when anyone gets fired, it's always, of course, off the record or anonymous quotes. But I am going to wonder if we're going to learn a little bit more from the White Sox clubhouse and White Sox players and what it was really like to play under Grifol. And my thought is, when you clear that much of the house and make all these changes like Getz has done, it's okay, it's not just Pedro, but it's also Pedro's friends as well and the coaching staff. And that's why we're making this overhaul change, because this just doesn't impact the White Sox. Having Jerschley now coming up from Charlotte, great for Justin, but that also impacts the Knights as well, as Pat Listash has to take over and manage the Knights the rest of the season.
So what's the question?
My question is, do you have any insight on why the clearing of Rodriguez and Montoyo and
the FOPs?
I mean, none were hired by the current front office, and I think it would be awkward to basically, especially in Tozar's case, like retain Pedro Grifol's best friend after firing him. These are people who had been kind of long time professional allegiances with Grifol. It just seems like this was kind of, probably his most trusted lieutenants, and kind of asking them to stay on and instead would both be strange and also maybe undercut the idea that we're trying to change the voices in this group and who's dealing with the team. They hired Thames. They seem to like Katz outside, even though he's brought on by Rick Hahn and Tony La Russa, but Tony La Russa's still there, so I guess that's a factor in that too. It seemed like the most logical people to kind of say like this is part of Grifol's leadership staff to roll out, and then if you're not going to give Montoya the bump up, I think it'd be kind of weird to keep him on. And also he was kind of an arranged marriage from kind of Rick Hahn hiring him and working closely with Grifol. It just didn't seem like he was someone that would, if he's not just going to be the interim manager for the sake of his experience level, wouldn't be someone who would really be part of the organization going forward. So it would be, obviously Sizemore is in similar lame duck status. Is a little bit excused from it for he's so new. This is kind of useful credential on his resume anyway, and he could still have a future role in the org or set him up somewhere else. But I think it would just be kind of a really awkward arrangement with Montoya. Here, serve out the end of the season with this staff we've hollowed out, and everything you were brought on to be a part of has been removed. Please try to avoid an all-time record. This just seems a lot cleaner.
It reminds me a little bit of the Simpsons Hunt from Red October episode where Homer surfaces with the submarine and 5 countries or continents are pointing cannons at him, and he responds with, "It's my first day," and everybody laughs and leaves him alone. I think that's Sizemore's role right now.
So Jim, with Getz saying that they want somebody outside the organization, which James astutely points out, they've said that in the past, like recent past, and somebody in uniform without tampering, without naming names, because that would lead to tampering. They're currently employed by other teams. You wrote about possible manager targets for Sox Machine recently. That's been rumored. Who do you think, very early speculation, is going to be in the top of Chris Getz's list that he's going to approach to take over for the White Sox?
Well, Schumacher is the obvious one, just because of La Russa ties, but of like he's manager of the year. Like he has that kind of ability in terms of overperforming with a roster that, as we've seen this year, was not as good as a wild card appearance would turn out to be. So that makes sense, some intuitive sense. Elsewhere, the list I came up with was in the system because there's no tampering if somebody floats the idea of Sergio Santos being a possible big league manager. And having been at Birmingham a couple times where La Russa's also been there, it made me wonder, is he kind of floating around and picking Santos's brain a little bit and being like, is this guy, what's the cut of his jib? Is he future management material? Will I give him the stamp of approval? So he jumped out to me as a possibility. Also, the fact that he's managed 3 teams in the minors and they've gone to the postseason every time. Even the Barons will be going to the postseason this time. So there is at least a little bit of, minor league winning credibility to where coming to the White Sox and winning. The Barons have not made the postseason since 2013. There is a little bit of excitement around him, although the way the Barons have played in the second half, looking like the White Sox in Double-A with no offense whatsoever, might take some of the shine off him. Francona seemed like a long shot just because of his health problems, and the White Sox current situation doesn't seem like the best possible environment for somebody with persistent hospitalizable stomach issues. So that's why I think he's probably out in my mind. So that's why, I think that's my initial making of the list. When it comes to the usual suspects, the guys that were in the mix last time around. I think most of them hired, like Espada's been hired. Quatraro was hired.
Yep.
So I'm trying to think of, Washington was hired. That was another one. So probably have to come up with a brand new list, which is nice, except for the whole idea of will that list be worth anything? Because the White Sox don't adhere to it or aren't allowed to adhere to it. That's the fun that we get to experience as people firing or following a hiring process that often isn't a process.
John Morosi of MLB.com tweeted out Skip Schumacher, which you mentioned, Jim. Mets bench coach John Gibbons, who is Chris Getz' final MLB manager. Gibbons was also manager of the Orioles, right? Was he manager of the Orioles when they were awful?
I only remember him with the Blue Jays.
Oh, that's I may be getting that wrong. Yeah, okay. I think you're right. I'm getting that crossed up. And Chris Fetter, who is the current pitching coach for the Detroit Tigers. Fetter was somebody that if the White Sox didn't hire Ethan Katz, that I was stumping for to be the White Sox pitching coach. Might have been if the Rick Hahn was able to hire AJ Hinch instead of having Tony La Russa take over. So an alternate universe in White Sox fandom, maybe Chris Fetter would have been the pitching coach for the White Sox and not Ethan Katz, but that would have probably been AJ Hinch managing, and who knows what would have happened to the White Sox if they had to survive what the Tigers are going through right now. I guess you take that, then facing down the barrel of being the worst team ever in Major League Baseball history. But outside of just a manager search, that's going to be upcoming. So that's going to be the number one thing in the offseason for Chris Getz. James, I'm sure in the press conference, Getz was getting a lot of questions about how exactly are you going to turn this around? Because no longer does he have Grifol as the scapegoat for how disappointing the season has been. There's going to be a lot of attention now in Chris Getz's decision-making and the players that he's going to bring in and the plans that they're going to put into place to stop being the worst team in baseball and try to be better in 2025 and beyond. Did Chris Getz give any insight or any clues in how he is preparing or what his plans are going to be to make this team better starting this offseason?
Certainly a lot of references to having a top 10 farm system. Certainly a little bit less certainty about how soon they'll spend on free agents. I would certainly bet not this year, both on his comments, the revenue situation, and I don't know, logic and experience. Usually,
so on the financial side, what did he mean by that? Did he go into more details, or was just like
he didn't say anything financially? I'm saying like we know that they're not drawing and they're not getting in to watch them on TV, and they have a new TV network going and they want a new stadium. Like it's not the confluence of factors that we usually see result in a spending spree by major league organizations. Getz did not comment on their revenue or lack thereof. He just said like there's a financial component to them returning to contention. It's not right now, which yes, it's August. It's rare to see major free agents signed in August, but I think it meant in terms of like not this off season would not be a unfair inference to make about how they would patch together this team. I mean, I think pretty much any team that's going to win 40 games doesn't like spend like they're going to win the next season. It would be nice. It'd be refreshing. It would probably accelerate the process, but no real indications like that. They're going to, the phrase he's trotted out a lot because he gets asked a lot, like, this was supposed to be a quick turnaround. What happened was that we want this to happen as quick as possible. But there are no shortcuts. So it's like, we're still taking the long, laborious tear down, rebuild path. We just hope we go through the path relatively quickly, which remains to be seen.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
This episode is brought to you by our good friends at NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. I'm sure by now you've all gotten back into your Sunday routines, but they could be even better. With NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV, you get the most live NFL games all in one place, every game, every Sunday, and you can even watch up to 4 different games at once with multi-view, one of my favorite inventions of this decade. It's exactly what you need to catch all the action. Make your Sundays more magical. And also, YouTube TV is great. I got it this year. It's awesome. Sign up now at youtube.com/BS. Device and content restrictions apply. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games.
Yeah, on that point, Jim, we talked about this, though, last November during the GM meetings when Chris Getz famously said, I don't like our team. Like, something happened when Jerry Reinsdorf hired Getz in August. And the reason was that he felt with Getz being hired, this would be a quick turnaround for the White Sox from a team that was on pace to lose more than 100 games, and they did. But then in October, Getz started to backpedal a little bit, saying that we need to take further deep dives into the organization. And then a few weeks later at the GM meetings, he says what I mentioned, I don't like our team. And I think it became very clear after his deep dives after the season that, oh, this is a much worse position than I am walking into, than what Jerry was expecting. And I need to level expectations with the boss. And I guess now this is also in light of Chris Russo blasting Jerry Reinsdorf on MLB Network today about the lack of success that Reinsdorf has had as White Sox owner. I'm sure that's going to go over very well for MLB Network later today with Russo's rant. But I wonder, right now you can see it on Twitter for White Sox fans. Great. Grifol's fired by Getz. When is Getz going to fire himself? And I'm being serious. Like, how long is this window for Chris Getz to prove that he can turn this ship around?
Yeah, the rebuild card is played already. White Sox fans can't trust it. So, when he brings up the farm system, and the farm system is top 10, at least according to Baseball America and Fangraphs and ESPN, but it's very lopsided. Like, it's hard to know where hitters are coming from. So, and when you hear about how it's tough to acquire bats from other organizations, like when he was trying to trade Dylan Cease, he could only find pitching with the kind of ceiling he wanted, that the position players discussed for Cease were a lot either farther away, or their ceilings weren't as high. They weren't as comfortable pulling the trigger. Didn't feel like a marquee trade for a guy like Cease, and so they couldn't do it. So that's just hovering over everything, to where if you say, you hide behind top 10 farm system, like, no, it doesn't quite work like that, especially since the White Sox were number 1 last time they were trying to rebuild, and that only got them so far. So it's thin as a defense. And while you're talking about like Getz not wanting to spend, I was looking at the 2004 Tigers, who went from 43 wins to 72. And I was looking at the additions they spent for Ivan Rodriguez. That was their big landmark. What are they even doing acquiring a catcher when they're a 43-win team? This is going to blow up in their faces. And they added like Rondell White as well, and they traded for Carlos Guillen. So they made some moves that got them closer to decent. And then the following year was another big spending spree with Magglio Ordonez. But you can definitely do like a 2-step spending process or like a primer. You can start laying track for like a more competent roster. I don't expect to be spending, but you can definitely get more transactional. And I think that's been a big problem with like the Rick Hahn, Kenny Williams era. It's been a big problem with Get so far, but also like Pedro Grifol didn't help when it came to cycling options through, like sticking with Tim Anderson every day, sticking with Andrew Benintendi every day, playing them through physical issues, off-field issues, what have you, that are sending their numbers to just unprecedented lows and having no problem solving ability. That also hampered the transactional ability to where like the White Sox just aren't doing anything except for getting like 2017 top prospects who are DFA'd or outrighted or what have you. So it's there are a lot of things the White Sox can do that they haven't done. Spending would be the obvious one. Like last time around, they got burned by not spending for Manny Machado or Bryce Harper a year that before would have been optimal, or even like Yasmani Grandal, like signing him like a year before the White Sox signed him when he had to settle for the 1-year deal with Milwaukee because they didn't want to lose a draft pick. But like having Grandal like a year younger, they would have gotten 3 good years instead of 2 if they signed it, or they would have gotten 3 of 4 good years rather than 2 of 4 and him falling off a cliff. So they tend to try to line things up so preciously to capitalize on what little money they're willing to spend, but it's all so delicate that all it takes is one wrong development, one prospect not panning out, one, like in the case of Grandal, a little bit more inefficiency with that contract than expected, to where everything falls apart and you're left, blaming Grandal for being the worst free agent signing of all time, when really just like, it's like a 35th percentile outcome for Grandal's White Sox contract, being a catcher in his mid-30s. Like there are a lot of ways that could have gone worse. And because the White Sox are just limited in how they want to spend, they have to, and their idea of top of market is either closers or catchers because they cost less than top of market right fielders or third baseman. That's kind of how they paint themselves into a corner. So if they are willing to not make the same mistakes of the previous administration, they do have to think about spending earlier than is optimal. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I don't see it happening this upcoming off season. I'm sorry, James.
Not kind of pushing more in the 2020, and the deadline was kind of a fault line between the previous front office and Ricky as well. And also just wanted to note, very tragic for the timing of the Benintendi to come when Pedro Grifol is not around to hold it over all of us. But we'll have to enjoy the Benintendi on our own.
Yeah, I like the Grifol photos where he's got like the arms like that. Like that's his, things are going okay for old Pedro, and he's got that stance.
Our friend B-Flow with the super chat. Thank you, sir. I just hope the next manager loses the press conference. Yeah, no more. Hey, they won the press conference. We don't need to have those.
Well, Tony didn't. Tony definitely did not.
Did Tony lose that press conference, or did Rick Hahn lose that press conference?
Everybody lost. Rick sounded like he was being recorded, like he was wearing a wire or something. Or he was afraid somebody else was, like, did not want to say the wrong thing, but also did not want to admit anything that could blow up on him later. And Tony could not reference any current player on the roster aside from Tim Anderson, because Vinny Duber entered him to the record asking him about, hey, like, what about a guy like Tim Anderson? I think he referenced Kenny Williams as a player, and he referenced Chet Lemon, but he did not reference any member of the 26-man roster or 40-man roster.
Yeah, we'll see. So again, this hiring process, I'm assuming, will really ramp up after the regular season is over, which the regular season concludes, I'm looking at the calendar, September 29th, as the White Sox will be in Detroit. Grady Sizemore, good luck, man. Go at it. Be interesting. There's no expectations. So you're getting an opportunity to be an MLB manager. To get, say, like Sizemore, I guess, James, what does Sizemore would have to do in the remaining of 2024 to merit serious consideration being the White Sox manager next season?
Win out? It just doesn't seem like what their plan is.
Okay. All right.
And I don't think.
What's their elimination number?
I guess he's not really at the experience level where it's like a huge, or like it's not like if Montoya, that'd be like vaguely insulting, like, hey, your former manager, we need you to ride this out. You have no chance of staying here. Whereas I think with Sizemore, it can be useful experience, if not like a resume credential. I would just like, be like one more thing to block Corey Julks from playing time. But like, I'd love if Grady could like slap it on and be a player manager, if only for the novelty's sake. But I don't know if that would boost his ability to stay or get more consideration. Be like, Jerry, we're saving on player salary by just having the manager be our platoon right fielder against left-handed pitching. But I don't know what he can do, because the GM basically said he wants to hire someone else, which I think, like, in general, based on what we've diagnosed the White Sox as their flaws for so long, that kind of stating that it's going to be someone from outside the organization. It's going to be someone currently active, not someone they're coaxing out of retirement. Should be like kind of the wave that we're looking for. It's just that with their history, I think you can tie it up as like, oh, they're just waiting for the Royals playoff run to end to pick someone off. But I think in general, he's trying to signal, the things that people have been calling for this insular organization for some time.
Yeah, I mean, he has hired, his front office is people outside of the White Sox organization that he has brought in. And again, another super chat. Thank you to our friend Aloha, Mr. Hand. Frankie needs more treats. Sure. He's currently barking. I don't know if you could hear him. He's barking at the fighter jets that are flying over my house right now, as the Chicago Air and Water Show is this weekend. So they're currently practicing. So he's having a great time. Aloha, Mr. Hand. But go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was looking at Miguel Cairo just because he was in a similar situation, taking over for Tony La Russa, not being a long-term lock for the position, but having an ability to make a positive impression. And he parlayed that into a Nationals bench coach job. So even if he wasn't long for the organization, it worked out well enough for him to where they briefly played better with him when he took over. Like, there was a brief burst of energy and competence, and then they sunk back into their can't escape 500 mode. But that's probably what I'm thinking for Sizemore, whether it's bolstering his role in the organization as somebody who, if not a manager, like if not somebody they want to saddle with, like seeing a project all the way through, can maybe at least be like, hey, White Sox fans know Grady Sizemore more. If he comes back in a heightened role next year, it won't be more of like a flyer. Like, remember there are stories about how like Grady Sizemore took a $15 an hour job in baseball because he just wanted to try coaching or wanted to try like just being involved in a game. And that's really all he came to the White Sox with was, he's somebody who's interesting, invested. Josh Barfield knows him. Let's see what he can do. And kind of hanging around. And if he can, make some kind of impression to where either relates well to the public, fans have a better idea of what's going on, there is some kind of ability to reflect addressing things the way Grifol always said things would be addressed and never did, to where even if he still wins 25% of his games, there's a way for him to, just have more of an identity in this organization.
Yeah, the thing that I'm curious about after this season ends, and I don't know, the next time we'll hear from Chris Getz, maybe during September call-ups, and why like Edgar Caro or who else be joining the team in September, maybe why Colson Montgomery will not be joining the White Sox in September. But after the season, James, I just don't know. I think White Sox fans, especially those on Sox Machine in the comments section that read and listen to us daily, are resigned to the fact that 2025 is not going to be a good season for the White Sox. Is it going to be as bad as 2024? Maybe. And that is pretty concerning. But I would say for the large part of the White Sox fandom, it's possible. But I think for a large part of the fan base, they don't have an appetite for another season like this. So I'm curious after the season when they hire their manager. I think a lot of those questions towards Chris Getz is going to be, okay, so you found your manager. How is 2025 going to be better than 2024 if you don't have a lot of money to spend on free agents? You don't have a lot of pieces to trade to acquire impact position players anymore outside of Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert, which I get. Is that it then for Getz? Like those are the two big moves that we're waiting to see is what he can get in return from the conversations that we had all of July is what can you get for Robert and Crochet, even though moving those guys theoretically makes the 2025 White Sox worse.
He did say he's looking to add to the farm system still. I would think Crochet would be a bit more likely than Robert just because like you want to sell Robert high, and right now he's hitting as poorly as he has like as a major leaguer. Perhaps aside from like his rookie like second month slump. I think like this team is, let's not disrespect how like incredibly great they are at losing to reference Jim. Like I think like even a normal performance team like would, outplay this one like with the same talent by like 10, 15 games. Like this has been like absurd. Like, no, I don't have like much reason to think like they'll be good next season, but will they be just completely bereft of any offensive talent? Will they do absolutely nothing in free agency? I don't think so. I think you'd probably see a lot more of the signings that are around like the Fetty level, just not like we're going to start signing like someone who's going to be our middle of the order bat for the next 5 years of this contention run, like our George Springer type of like addition. I think like making patch moves that, and making arguments like this guy is going to be like a league average or a 2-win player, a couple spots in the lineup. I think it's easily foreseeable. And you could possibly, if your Cats maybe turn around and say like, yeah, like we didn't get much from the catching position this past year. 2025, you're going to see a lot more Edgar Caro. That should probably be better, right? Maybe you see a better improved Brian Ramos and Colson Montgomery who knock on the door or insert themselves in a way where they're factors in 2025. Maybe you see Miguel Vargas and Brooks Baldwin take a step forward. I think they have enough places where they see guys arrow up and, not that they're going to spend nothing where you think, and on top of like, maybe they're not, being managed pretty poorly, that you can, and there's going to be real cohesion between like the manager's office and like what our actual plan is. And maybe we won't just like collectively find a way to be the 30th ranked defense, even when I'm adding glove only players all the time. Where there's improvement, where the floor is higher, even if the ceiling is like, bumping you in the head every time you stand up straight.
Well, my concern about that is that like Dominic Fletcher was kind of their idea for average bats. Yeah, that was Chris Getz's, that was his kind of first future looking stamp on the organization was getting Fletcher. They need a top of the order bat or somebody can bat towards the top of the order, play good defense, and just hasn't been a factor. So that's, when it comes to seeking average, the White Sox, they try it a lot and they come up short so often that, I think trying to shoot for 2 wins above replacement is just really hard for them to do.
Yeah, and we'll see how the free agent market plays out for the rest of the season. Keep an eye on bench coaches, current managers, and who the White Sox will be targeting after the 2024 season. Again, they can't tamper, so they got to wait until the regular season is over. If there's anyone that's on a postseason team, do they have to get permission on days off to interview them, James? Do you know what the process is? I know the process for the NFL. But for Major League Baseball, I don't know if they could speak to coaches that are on a postseason team.
Yeah, they can interview them on days off. They try to not bull rush them. And I think, the coaches themselves are in positions where they're trying to like be respectful of prep. But yeah, you can interview assistants on days off. It's happened in the past. Gets kind of initiated like during these final 2 months that they'll be having conversations with people they know around the league, maybe talking to references or close associates to try to do background work before like they can start formally interviewing people at the close of the season. So, interview friends of Skip Shoemaker, I guess, or talk to Tony La Russa about him. that would be an option. But yeah, I think he was a little indecisive about whether it be after the World Series or after the season. So it makes me kind of think it'll be in that pocket between where they're trying to talk to guys with teams that are out of it pretty quickly, but also finding their ways to make formal interviews during the playoffs. Some guys that might be involved. But yeah, it's a little bit limited for the final 7 weeks of the regular season for sure.
Yeah. So we'll be paying attention to and coming up with lists of bench coaches and possible managers on the way out around Major League Baseball that Chris Getz could be interviewing. The offseason plan project is going to be a lot more fun now on Sox Machine because you can have your own managerial search for the White Sox. They're not going to have a lot of money to spend, so they're going to have to be thrifty again in free agency. They have two big trade pieces in Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert Jr., and it would help a great deal if Miguel Vargas started hitting for the White Sox, who's currently 3 for 30 in his brief time so far with the White Sox, to provide a positive outcome of the Eric Fetty trade and see if Brooks Baldwin can continue to progress. And who knows, maybe Colson Montgomery and Brian Ramos do catch on fire in August going into September down in Charlotte. Those would be really good signs. I think those are the things that could build some momentum in trying to sell the idea, Jim, that the 2025 White Sox are going to be better, because I just don't think that this organization could take another 2024 season.
I'm hoping, for obvious reasons, that like there's a sudden turnaround, but I think it'd be fascinating. Like somehow if they have a 500 record the rest of the year, and all of a sudden it looks like they could have just solved this months ago by making this change, even if it isn't that simple. Just that's what I'm hoping for, is just some kind of reward for making this decision, just to encourage Jerry Reinsdorf to say, hey, here's what happened. So when we actually address issues as they're happening versus like months after the fact when rot is starting to set in, and all of a sudden, now we have to change a whole lot more because of just how this impacted how lineups were drawn, how players were promoted, etc. So that's, I think, these last 6 weeks or so are meaningless for the standings, basically, aside from whether they make history or not. But I do think there is value in just showing some level of problem solving ability. I think that's my biggest issue with Grifol. And just, when he's going to take a lot of slings and arrows for just being the worst manager of all time for the White Sox, by winning percentage and such, but also like he had no problem solving ability. Like Benintendi was not a problem he addressed. Anderson, not a problem. Eloy Jimenez, every time he's healthy, he played, no matter like the effort level, no matter how he looked visually, if he was running 50% or easing up or grimacing, like there's no reference to it. Like, got to have him in the lineup, got to have that bat in the lineup. Like, no, you don't. You really don't. You don't have to have anything when the team is this bad or the numbers are what they are. So he was just like praying for the back of the baseball card that never showed up, aside from like Benintendi just recently. But it's the next manager who at least shows some kind of enforcement of standards or some idea of what a player's track record isn't enough. There's a balance of like stability and making sure that you're not just yanking guys in and out of the lineup or moving guys around, and like Miguel Vargas, not having them go from left to third to first to DH. But I think when it comes to the components contributing to just how historically bad the White Sox are, there is a lot that can be done that Grifol just refused to do.
Yeah. Ralph in the YouTube comments, starting pitching could be good next year. I agree, Ralph. Even in this past series, I thought Davis Martin and Jonathan Cannon threw very well. We're going to see Garrett Crochet and Chris Flexen over the weekend. National TV, Chris Flexen, which if you listen to our podcast this morning, James is very high on. He thinks Flexen's going to ball out against the Chicago Cubs. I agree on the pitching side will be better for the White Sox in 2025. Drew, thanks for the super chat, and thank you for the comment as well. Also, James Fegan for 2025 White Sox manager. We're putting that out there right now. James, are you a contender? Are you leaving Sox Machine to be the White Sox manager in 2025?
Drew and I worked together back at Fox 28 in South Bend, and I thought we had a good relationship. To find out in such a public fashion that he means me ill is distressing. But when people show you who they are, believe them.
Well, that will do it for this emergency edition of Sox Machine Live. Thank you to everyone that watched the live stream on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. If this is the first time you are watching a video on our YouTube channel or live stream, please hit the subscribe button. We greatly appreciate it. We also do upload the audio versions of Sox Machine Live into our podcast feed, which you can subscribe to the Sox Machine podcast, also on YouTube, but via Spotify and Apple Music as well. James will be at the games this weekend, so make sure to follow him at JR Fegan. You can follow Sox Machine at Sox Machine. You can follow me at SoxMachine_Josh. This edition of Sox Machine Live is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for watching and listening.